My name is Dr. Shirley Green, and I'm the president of the Rochester Alumnae chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. You might be wondering, who is Delta? What do they do? And why this event? Great questions. Well, who are we? Delta Sigma Theta Sorority was founded on the campus of Howard University in 1913 by 22 collegiate women. Our founders envisioned an organization in which we are committed to scholarship, sisterhood, service, and social action. 113 years later, we have over 350,000 women in 1,050 chapters worldwide. I like to say that. Worldwide. What do we do? Our work focuses on our 5 programmatic thrusts: educational development, economic development, political awareness and involvement, international awareness and involvement, and physical and mental health. We work with young girls throughout our Delta Academy Delta Gens program, and through our annual fundraising events, we are able to provide over $10,000 annually to high school seniors as we are committed to education. We host yearly events focused on economic growth and development, and we are a nonpartisan group who emphasizes the importance of social action, ensuring that people have an awareness of what impacts them and how to engage through social action. The final thrust is why we are here today: physical and mental health. Deltas understand the importance of promoting healthy lifestyles, mental resilience, and health equity. It is important for our organization to provide opportunities to have conversations within the community about various health issues. Today, across the eastern region of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, members are bringing awareness of the importance of participation in clinical trials. As African American women, we often shy away from participating in clinical trials. History has not always been kind to us. It has not always been trustworthy when it comes to participation in trials for African Americans. But we have also learned that we need to gain a better understanding because our participation matters. If you want to ensure better outcomes for our health, representation in clinical trials matter. Now that you know who we are, what we do, and why we are here, I want to take this time to welcome you all to our event today. I want to thank you for spending the afternoon with us. I want to also thank our partners from Rochester Regional Health for hosting this event with us. Dr. Amy Bodbrook, yes, Director Heather Bachetta, and Dr. Prad Patak. And also Dr. Lakia Wilson, who is a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. This work cannot be done in isolation. We need great partners. So we thank you, Rochester Regional Health, for being with us. We thank all of you for being in the presence of us as the Eastern region recognizes the importance of clinical trials and why representation matters. We are in for new information, from mistrust to meaning, why clinical trials matter in our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam President, Dr. Green. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Dr. Lakia Wilson. I am VP of Community Engagement and Social Impact here at Rochester Regional Health. Also, with the Rochester Alumnae chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, I am the co-thrust chair for physical and mental health, along with Dr. Anika Simone Johnson. Thank you. We thank all of you for being here today for our Regional Day of Service. Today's conversation, from mistrust to meaning, why clinical trials matter in our communities of color, is both timely and deeply important. For many Black and brown communities, mistrust of the medical system is not rooted in misunderstanding. It is rooted in lived experience and history, from unethical experimentations and exploitations to exclusion from decision-making to inequities to access, quality, and outcomes. Medicine and research has not always honored the dignity, the autonomy, or the humanity of communities of color. That history has consequences, and it continues to shape how many people experience healthcare and clinical research today. At the same time, we are at a critical moment. Medicine advances towards more targeted therapy and precision medicine. The absence of Black and brown voices in clinical trials has real implications. When our communities are underrepresented in research, the data that informs future care, the treatment protocols, medical innovation does not always reflect fully us. That means therapies may be less effective, risk may be misunderstood, and disparities may widen rather than shrink. Moving forward requires us to do two things at once: acknowledge the past with honesty, and build a future with intention, transparency, and trust. Participation of Black and brown communities in clinical trials is not about experimentation, it's about equality. It's about ensuring that our communities are represented in the data that shapes the care of tomorrow. It is about contributing to the knowledge that can improve the outcomes of our families, our neighbors, and our future generations. Today, we are fortunate to hear from leaders who are helping us to advance this work here, right at Rochester Regional Health. We have Dr. Amy Bordar, who is Director of Oncology Research, who will share insights on current clinical trials that are underway here in our system. We have Heather Bachetta, who is the Director of Precision Medicine, along with Dr. Prad Pratap, who is the Medical Director of Precision Medicine. They will speak on how diverse participation in research strengthens databases, advances precision medicine, and ultimately leads to better and more equitable care. Each speaker will offer a brief presentation followed by questions and answers with discussion. We encourage open dialogue with questions, reflection, and honest engagement as we explore how to move from mistrust to meaning together. Thank you for being part of this important conversation and bringing your commitment to advancing health equity in our communities that we serve. Before I welcome our speakers up to the mic, I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping. Let me point out our two emergency exits. So we have one right over here to the right, which we all entered through. We also have one in the back left. So those will exit out to the main hallways and out the door that you came to. For medical emergencies, we are blessed to have medical professionals in the room here today. But in case one of us is incapacitated, we can call our security that will help us with emergency services, and their phone number is 922-1300. If there's no further, bathrooms, yes. So if you exit out this door, on both sides of the hallway, there are two sets of bathrooms, so to the left and to the right. So without further ado, let me invite Dr. Bordar up to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson, Dr. Green, and Delta Sigma Theta for inviting me here today. Just let me know if you can't hear me. So I want to lead you through this discussion of empowering our tomorrow, clinical trials in today's medical research. So we're going to go through a couple of topics. I want to talk about the importance of clinical trials, We're gonna go over some disparities. We're gonna go specifically through breast cancer, and how some of the gaps in clinical research have affected communities, such as the Black community. We're gonna talk about some things in history, world history and US history, that have fueled mistrust. And then actions that have started to bridge the gap. We're going to discuss personalized medicine and where medical advancements are headed now, and the importance of clinical trials for advancing medicine for the illnesses that we still struggle with. And then we're going to talk about empowering future advances put together. The importance of clinical trials. When you think of anything that you may have experienced medically, most of them have been at some point of a clinical trial, other than some medications that may have been grandfathered in. Clinical trials allow us to challenge the standard of care. We should never just accept where we are. People still struggle with illness and cancer. I'm going to speak mostly about cancer because that's what I know, and that's what I can share with you. But clinical trials help us to evaluate the efficacy of our medications, safe dosing, adverse effects, and exploring new medications, pushing the boundaries on modern medicine. And today we'll also talk about personalized medicine and targeted therapy. And those are really where we are in 2026. So we're gonna start off by talking a little bit about breast cancer. I'm going to give you a quick education on breast cancer. There are 3 things that are tested in any hospital on any breast cancer. Positivity for estrogen receptor, positivity for progesterone receptor, and positivity for HER2, an overexpressed protein. Most of the breast cancer that I see and treat are hormone positive, HER2 negative. I tell my patients this is somewhat of the garden variety of breast cancer, and most people have a good prognosis. Not everyone. But the most challenging and aggressive of the breast cancer types is triple negative. Triple negative breast cancer is negative for estrogen, negative for progesterone, negative for HER2. It leaves a lot less in my toolbox for fighting that disease when someone comes and meets me for help and treatment. Talking a little bit about incidence versus mortality. Incidence is when breast cancer occurs, and then mortality being death. We can see here that there is a higher rate per 100,000 of death in non-Hispanic Blacks than in non-Hispanic whites, compared to the incidence. As far as triple negative breast cancer, we also see higher rates of triple negative breast cancer, this aggressive subtype, in the Black community as well. 19% versus 9% of non-Hispanic whites. This is the part that I can't stress enough, screening, but this is the very concerning part about delivery of care and spreading the word on screening. The incidence of breast cancer can occur in different stages. Many people have heard different stages of cancer, stage 1, stage 2. Localized breast cancer means that it's only in the breast at this time. It can be surgically removed and a high chance of cure. Regional means that the breast cancer has moved to lymph nodes, usually lymph nodes under the arm. Distant breast cancer means stage 4. At that time, it is considered incurable disease. We certainly want to catch breast cancer before it is distant or even regional disease. We can see there are higher rates of regional or distant breast cancer occurrence and incidence in non-Hispanic Blacks and non-Hispanic whites. So those numbers that I just showed you were from 2024, essentially now. These are also modern studies that have come out. These are studies that I look at for guidance on the latest and greatest of how to treat my patients. The Natalie trial in 2024, what that gave to oncologists was, instead of just using anti-hormonal therapy for hormone positive HER2 negative breast cancer, which is what we typically do to prevent a recurrence, the question was for some women who might be, and men, who it might be at higher risk, can we add a medication that's already being used in stage 4 disease called ribociclib? And the answer was, the outcome of the study was, it looks like we can at least delay it, if not improve also overall survival. But the issue with this was, and a high criticism of the study was, that only 1.7% of the patients in the study were Black. In 2025, things were not any better. The Enable 120 study was looking at patients who had a PIK3CA mutation. These patients are also more resistant to anti-hormonal therapies. And so the question was, can we add an already FDA-approved medication targeted at this mutation to better outcomes? Again, the answer was yes. And then oncologists are challenged, can we extrapolate the findings that were on 325 patients? Sounds like a lot, but worldwide this is not much. Should we be extrapolating that to everybody? Because then this disparity, as you can see here, is 0.6% of patients were from the Black community. It's not all about just participation in clinical trials. We can also use clinical trials to better understand where healthcare is being delivered inefficiently. In 2018, I was a second-year fellow. That's a doctor who's training in their specialty, so I was learning oncology. So in 2018, I would be with my preceptors, and I would meet men with black men with prostate cancer. And they would say, well, Amy, they just happen to do worse. They just have worse outcomes. We don't know why, they're just doing worse. The question was, do they actually do worse? I went to the American Society for Clinical Oncology, has this big conference every year in Chicago. Thousands of oncologists attend, and then they have their plenary sessions. These are big sessions where they talk about the biggest abstracts and medical findings that come out that year. And one of them was the Abbey Race trial. And I thought about what my preceptors had been telling me all along. When this trial split down the middle, Black and white men with prostate cancer, castrate-resistant prostate cancer, a very aggressive subtype, and put them on this new standard of care called abiraterone. In the initial abiraterone studies, Black men were underrepresented. In this study, initially they seemed to even do better. And by the final release of the study in 2021, the overall survival was the same for all men, 36 months. The significance of this, maybe we should be questioning everything. And disparities in enrollment in care and delivery of care. So we can actually use clinical trials also to our advantage to question these disparities as well. It makes me, as an oncologist, question, who are these guidelines written for? These are a couple of the organizations, National Comprehensive Cancer Network, ASCO, ASH. They tell me what to do and how to teach people. I'm only as good as the studies that show me what to do. And I rely on the communities to participate and partner with us so that we can deliver the best science in medicine. So, a couple history lessons, I have 3. We're gonna start worldwide first. We're gonna go back to World War II. Now, as far as history lessons of atrocities in medical science, we could be here all evening. So I've only picked a couple, okay? World War II was a huge global catalyst in how human beings were treated, starting with the Holocaust. On the right side of this slide are Miriam and Eva Moses. They were twins. I actually got to see Eva speak in 2010 in Albany, New York. She's since passed in 2019. Eva and Miriam were victims of Dr. Joseph Mengele, who did twin experiments in Auschwitz. Essentially, one twin was the experiment and one twin was the control. If one twin died of the experiment, the other one would be killed for the autopsy. Eva was given a bacterial illness, or at least we presume, nobody told her. She became septic. Septic is when you have an overwhelming infection to the point where your blood pressure starts to drop, your organs start failing, and you die. Eva became very sick, and she recounted it to us when she spoke to us in Albany, that she found a sink. She crawled and snuck to a sink, unseen, and drank the water. That saved her life, and kept drinking the water and drinking the water. Eva survived, therefore Miriam survived. They had lost the remainder of their family, who were not friends. We will go back to World War II. This is a study that many people in the room, I suspect, may have heard of. This is the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. But I'm going to talk about it anyways, because when we stop talking about it is when we forget, right? So, on the right, this is the memorandum from the CDC in 1972 to stop the experiment. This was 40 years too late. Let's go through a timeline. Tuskegee, Alabama had a high rate of syphilis, so they chose this location, the researchers, to study syphilis in black men. The men were just told you have bad blood. They were even told they were being treated. Back then it was with mercury, but they were given 2 low doses of mercury for the researchers to think they were being treated, if they were being treated at all with mercury. So the study began in 1932. In 1934, the researchers told doctors in Alabama, do not treat the men who are on the experiment. In 1941, when there was the option to be recruited for World War II, men bravely signed up, and they were denied recruitment because that would mean the military would have to treat them for a venereal illness. So they still could not get help. In 1947, perhaps the most atrocious part of this is penicillin was determined to be the treatment and cure for syphilis. They were still denied treatment. In 1964, the Worldwide Declaration of Helsinki for Global Ethical Principles to Guide Physicians with Clinical Trials and the Treatment of Human Patients was written. Still nothing happened. 1969, the CDC allowed the continuation of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. The CDC did not stop the experiment. A whistleblower did in 1972 and told the New York Times, and then it landed on the front page. And that was what stopped the experiment. Retribution, financially, was given to patients and families, but the damage was done, and the apology really didn't follow. In 2009, the last known victim, a widow, died. This affected not only the men, but their wives and their children for decades. This was not the only area where we had issues with clinical trials and regulation by the 1950s and 60s. It feels like today that pharmaceutical companies have a very high weight on the distribution of medications. But back then, in some ways, it was even worse. There was a lot of pressure for medications without them being regulated and tested. One was thalidomide. In Europe and Australia, women were taking this for non-infant pregnancy. It only took 1 dose for birth defects to be caused. Babies and children were born with short or no arms and legs. In 1961, a new FDA drug reviewer was just placed in her position, Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey. One of the first things that crossed her desk was approval for thalidomide in the U.S. She is famously known for turning it down, despite not having studies, more anecdotes from Europe, and high pressure from drug companies. There were thalidomide victims in the United States because there were sample drug programs that went under the radar because we still did not have significant regulation in trial processes in the United States. Later, thalidomide actually came back in the picture, interestingly enough. It was used for cancer treatments, mainly multiple myeloma, and today we use second-generation agent lenalidomide. every time that we have a patient on this, because of that, the government goes very far in the other direction with something called the REMS program. I have 80-year-olds on lenalidomide, and every single month they have to answer for the government, is there any chance you could be pregnant? And men. So let's start to talk about how things started to turn in the 20th century. And they're not where they need to be, but we started to move in a different direction. So going back to what happened out of World War II, there was the Nuremberg Code. Perhaps some of you have heard about the Nuremberg war trials. So you had these crimes against humanity from the physicians and scientists that were doing experiments in concentration camps, and they needed some kind of standard to judge them by. So they came up with this Nuremberg Code. That later led to the Declaration of Valencia that I previously mentioned in 1964 by the World Medical Assembly, a little different than the World Health Organization. But this was really one of the first guides for ethical principles for physicians. Later leading in the United States, the National Research Act out of a response largely to Tuskegee and the formation of the Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects in Biomedical and Behavioral Research. And in 1979, we had the Belmont Report. And the Belmont Report exists to this day, though there's been other additions and there's been amendments to it. Let me share with you the Belmont Report. There are 3 guiding principles to the Belmont Report. Respect for persons, appropriate weight to an individual's opinions and choices to further their own interests, also known as informed consent. Number 2, beneficence. Protect from harm and make efforts to secure the individual's well-being, also known as first do no harm. And number 3, justice, fairness in distribution, also known as who is going to bear the burdens of research. If we are testing questionable substances on a vulnerable population and then the results are then being extrapolated to the larger population on a whole, that's not justice. On a smaller scale, any institution that is reviewing or conducting clinical trials, we have institutional review boards. Rochester Regional has their own institutional review board. And the IRB, which I have to answer to, is responsible for safeguarding the rights and welfare of human subjects. On the board, there has to be diversified and culturally different backgrounds and gender representation. And also, importantly, scientific and non-scientific members. They have members from the community. They can have people from other careers, clergy, other people are also on the board as part of any meeting that they hold. Their job is to review, approve, or disapprove proposed research. For study sponsors, for their research trials and investigators, they have responsibilities as well. They have to make sure that patients are at least receiving the standard of care. I think one of the fears with clinical trials is, well, my doctor said I could get help, or I can go on this clinical trial and I may be randomized to something that's going to be helpful or placebo. That's not ethical. There are very few situations nowadays that use a placebo, usually when there is not a better recourse. But ethical clinical trials usually compare something new plus the standard of care versus the standard of care alone. So they are responsible for at least making sure patients receive the standard of care treatment. There should be transparency, informing patients of changes that may occur on the trial, amendments that may come up, and also responsible for selecting qualified participants for safe enrollment onto studies. So what kind of clinical trials are now coming across? And again, I'm going to speak mainly pertaining to cancer, but there are new things coming up all the time in cardiology, immunology, and many other medical fields that are exciting, but have to be approached in a safe fashion. Medicine has become much more personalized. I usually don't treat 2 lung cancers the same. I usually don't treat 2 breast cancers the same. There's two different types of personalized medicine. There's genomic. That means the genes that you got from mom or the genes that you got from dad. And sometimes people inherit something mutationally that can predispose to cancer or other conditions. Somatic, in the cancer world, is a little bit different. These are mutations that are actually made by the tumor. So the tumor wants to live, wants to grow. These cancer cells are sick, they make mistakes when they replicate, and they make mutations that can drive their growth. Medications, the idea of medications is if we find those mutations and find what is driving a tumor to grow, maybe we can work on that and the tumor will shrink. And we've had good success with that. See this alphabet soup here? This is our rubric for just lung cancer. These are somatic mutations. So almost every lung cancer now is sent away for its own genetic testing. I'm not testing the patient for what they got from mom and dad. I'm testing their tumor for mutations. And each of these mutations has an FDA-approved medication. Each of these was a clinical trial. And looking at this list, most of these clinical trials have been since 2015. Some other exciting things that are being tested now in clinical trials. We have BiTE therapy, and I'm just going to give you an overview. You have a T cell in your immune system and you got a cancer cell. BiTE therapy takes some medication and introduces them to each other. So the T cell can then kill the cancer. Antibody drug conjugate, this is another fastly growing medication delivery system. This is an antibody that has a little Trojan horse, or it is the Trojan horse, I suppose. So this medication, this antibody, goes to the tumor cell, drops off this chemotherapy molecule, and the tumor dies. Looks like a Trojan horse. Now, it took a long time for this to be more of a prime time type of therapy. When there's clinical trials, there's phase 1 clinical trials that are mainly looking at safe dosing. And then there's phase 2 is a little larger group, usually looking at safety again. And now starting to question efficacy. Phase 3 trials are very large trials, like some of the ones I had talked about earlier. They're really looking at efficacy. And then there's actually phase 4 trials, where after something's been approved, we're looking at the population on a whole and making sure there's no new safety concerns coming out when now it's available to thousands or millions of people. So there's different phases, and something important that I tell my patients is clinical trials are a two-way street. There's the scientific benefit, but there's also the personal benefit. So I have very different conversations for a patient that's on a phase 1 trial, which is usually at very large centers, versus somebody who's on a phase 3 trial. So the question you might be asking is, okay, this is a very cancer-focused talk. Does this apply to me? Statistically speaking, unfortunately, there's going to be cancer in many people's lives, not necessarily personally, but maybe somebody you love. And that's why the work of clinical trials and the knowledge that they're out there is important. People don't have to be on a clinical trial, but you should have a right to know about it. The most important thing I can say is be an informed advocate. I would love to tell you everybody you're going to meet is going to tell you everything that you ever need to know. But it's very important with a clinical trial. You can ask for a copy of the consent form and the trial information, read it over, and not feel rushed into a decision. It is important to say, tell me how this is going to benefit the scientific community, but am I going to reap the results? Is this going to help me, or is this for the greater good? What are my risks associated with that? Be forthcoming with the questions. The study should be prepared to answer. And ongoing trials that happen over time are designed for participants to withdraw. In fact, usually their statistical planning has already accounted for people that are going to be lost to follow-up or want to stop their involvement on the study. And it's very important, okay, I see the clinical trial, what are my alternatives in my care? I'm going to go over briefly just some of the clinical trials that we have at Lipson Cancer Institute, and I'm hoping this doesn't apply to anyone, but it's more to give an idea of the things that are now being offered. We are offering clinical trials now in triple-negative breast cancer. This is that very dangerous breast cancer. And we offer medications now, such as sacituzumab, which is being used in stage 4, and trying to see if we can use it after a surgery for breast cancer to improve the likelihood that they will not recur. If a woman is not randomized to this, and men are eligible as well, there is men with breast cancer. If a woman is not randomized to that, they still get the standard of care treatment. We are planning on opening something known as the Rosetta study, also looking at a new medication for women that would not get chemotherapy and immunotherapy if they're in stage 4. It's devastating. Sometimes I tell patients with triple-negative breast cancer, they do some research and they say, so I'm gonna get chemotherapy and immunotherapy, right? You really don't qualify for immunotherapy, and that's not good. So this gives them another opportunity to get chemotherapy plus perhaps a medication that would help them respond. We have some interesting findings now with something known as circulating tumor DNA. Circulating tumor DNA is, we can take your blood and see if your cancer is in the blood, but we don't know how to use this technology. It's very interesting technology now, but we don't know if finding in your blood means that it will actually spread or if the immune system will clear it. So we now have some trials to better understand the technology that already exists so that we can use it properly. One trial we have for colon cancer is for people who have curative colon cancer, it gets cut out by a surgeon. And usually they will meet with an oncologist to say, do I have to have additional therapy such as chemo to make sure it doesn't come back? And circulating tumor DNA, if it's negative, people can choose to be randomized to either chemotherapy or not having chemotherapy, or they could choose no trial, please, I just want the standard of care. Or if they're positive, they would be randomized to traditional chemotherapy versus higher intensity chemotherapy, knowing that they may be at higher risk. In pancreatic cancer, we're now identifying that about 10% of patients with this very aggressive illness had a mutation that they inherited from mom or dad, or their tumor decided to make that mutation. So when I treat somebody with pancreatic cancer and they get it cut out and the surgeon tells them it's gone, unfortunately they have a very high rate of recurrence. So I give them all chemotherapy. In stage 1 patients with very early disease qualify for chemotherapy. And then I tell them we have to hope for the best and follow scans. We know in breast cancer that for patients with these mutations, BRCA or PALB2, some people may have heard of BRCA, very high risk of breast cancer. We know for breast cancer patients that receiving a drug called olaparib will decrease their chances that it recurs. So now we're trying to do the same in pancreatic cancer if a patient so wishes. In leukemia, we have something known as the MyeloMatch study. For many years, leukemia has been treated very well, but a little bit all over the map, a lot of variety in the approaches. And very difficult for patients who are very sick, they need to be hospitalized usually right away, to get to institutions that have good trials. So this is more of an effort to standardize across the country. If people enter MyeloMatch, they can usually find if they are eligible for a sub-study. If they're not, they get still the standard of care, the best care available in 2026. But if they are, then they're comparing everyone on that study across the nation to finally get a little bit more of a streamlined approach to leukemia. We have a couple of trials that we're considering opening in lung cancer. For patients with an EGFR mutation, there are very good targeted therapies on the market. The problem is when their stage 4 illness grows through that, which can be years, but when it does grow, they usually receive chemotherapy afterwards, and I have to be honest, they only do so well. So now we are considering opening a trial with the option of trying a new medication targeted for that EGFR mutation. And then if they still progress after that, they still get the standard of care therapy. Another first-line treatment for lung, there are medications aimed at the KRAS mutation. This used to be considered the undruggable mutation. We couldn't develop anything that would really target KRAS, and we do have targets now for some KRAS variants. And so we're offering this for KRAS G12D plus, again, the standard of care. Just a couple of things we have open to the community. We've been partnering with 1330 Cancer Connect, great support group for adolescents and young adults with cancer, for individuals ages 13 to 39. We've partnered with this organization and the University of Rochester to do a widespread citywide survey to better understand what do they actually need rather than just putting out services that may or may not be needed. Gina Well is another community effort, but since there's another talk after this, I'm gonna leave that alone. And then I have some community resources, and I really just wanna go through these a little bit. Clinicaltrials.gov, it may seem very cumbersome to navigate with clinical trials, that you might have to be a doctor, but this is actually public information. Every treatment trial is available through the FDA on clinicaltrials.gov. So people can search what we have available, what Roswell has available, what California has available, what China has available. It's on this site. This is a public database. I have had patients who have come with a list from this site and said, do any of these apply to me? Cancer support community, formerly known as Gilda's Club. This is for all cancers, which is nice because some cancers aren't as common as others. And so they have different chapters in different cities. There's the Breast Cancer Coalition of Rochester. I can't tell you how fortunate we are to have a very good breast support group in Rochester. I think a lot of cities don't have something with this equivalent. They are very passionate about specifically helping this population. There's also Touch, the Black Breast Cancer Alliance. This one's a little newer to me, but they're starting to contact us based on some of the trials we're opening for the very purpose of this talk about engaging the Black community in making sure they're represented on trials. So this is an organization, and this has become a national movement as well. And then 1330 Cancer Connect, one that I mentioned before, is really for adolescents and young adults who have been affected by cancer, a population that really doesn't feel understood when they have cancer, which some people still consider a disease with aging, but affects many young individuals. So I thank you very much for your for your attention, and I open it up to questions.
So actually, we're going to hold questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for that. It was very informative talk. We got history. We got a little bit of med school for those that are interested in becoming a doctor. And then we learned a lot about the resources that are in the community. So thank you so much. And now we're going to invite Dr. Hatak and Heather to talk a little bit about GENA. And then we'll have questions and discussions after this presentation.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And while Heather is putting up our slides, I just wanted to reinforce some of the things that Dr. Bodrock said. I am going to speak about Gina Well, but I'm also an oncologist who's treated patients for over 35 years. And we've seen so many advances in cancer care over that period of time. Couldn't have seen those without good, accurate clinical trials and without participation in those trials. So as an oncologist, I'm strongly in favor of supporting clinical trials at an institutional level, at our practice level, at an individual level. Why would you as a community want to help and participate? Well, it's in your interest too. At the end of the day, I think there are good studies actually that show that people who participate in clinical trials do better than the ones that didn't. And there might be several reasons for that. Think about it. If I have treatment A for a cancer that doesn't work so well, and I'm looking for newer things, I need to do a study that compares treatment B that might be better than treatment A, and I need to prove that. So I need to do a study that gives people either one or the other and show that treatment B is better. Well, if you join that study, at least you have a 50% chance of getting treatment B and getting something better. And hopefully by the end of it, we'll prove it and we'll move on to treatment B. So as a community, that's how we make progress. And I think it's important for us all to sort of get that concept. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. We're going to focus on a very new and interesting research project, but also community health project that our health system has joined. It's called GenoWell. And this will be a two-person presentation. I'm going to do the first part, and Heather will do the second. So, better healthcare is in your genes. If you know your genetic makeup, there's a lot of things you can do differently that might affect your outcome. Your DNA can tell you if you're at risk for some common cancers, and also for heart disease. And proactive knowledge helps your healthcare providers provide the right kinds of preventative treatments and reduce your risks. Rochester Regional Health is dedicated to providing high quality, accessible healthcare to everyone in our community. So this is a program that's open to everybody in the community, regardless of who their primary care doc is. The only requirement is that you're over the age of 18, and at this point, it's also a requirement that you speak English, because our consent forms are only in English. We're changing that.
Okay.
So what are we doing? The goal is to analyze DNA from 100,000 people in our population. So 100,000 upstate New Yorkers over the next 5 years. That's an ambitious number. Again, this is a research project, so people need to sign consent before we can recruit them. And I'll get into that in a minute. And these sequences will help us better understand over time how DNA impacts your health and potentially improve healthcare, as I'll show you. What does participation entail? Anyone above the age of 18 can get to our website, sign a consent form, which will generate a message in our electronic record. We will enter an order for the test, and you can go to any Rochester Regional Laboratory station, and they will draw 3 cc's of blood. That's what it is. So we're not doing this alone. We're doing this in collaboration with 16 other health systems that Helix has connected with. They've developed this Helix Research Network. The goal is actually to have more. They're still recruiting health systems. Their goal is to get up to 25. Each health system will recruit 100,000 people. So that total is 2.5 million people in this country will be DNA sequenced. Why participate? So one of the things we're doing immediately, so anyone who participates gets the results of these genetic tests that predict for common cancers and a common cause of heart disease. So 1 in 75 individuals will have one of these conditions. These are considered CDC Tier 1 conditions. So CDC defines, Centers for Disease Control, defines Tier 1 conditions to be those that are immediately actionable and that might have an impact on your life expectancy if you do all the right things for preventive act. So those are the only things that are getting immediately reported in the patient's medical record. 90% of people who have these conditions don't know that they're at risk for them. So we're finding a lot of people who wouldn't have otherwise known, who need this kind of attention, and they're already benefiting from this kind of preventive care. So again, testing for CDC Tier 1 conditions. What are the specific conditions? 1 to 2% of all patients have one of these. Familial hypercholesterolemia makes you prone to have a high cholesterol. Now, I know many people have high cholesterol and have been told that by their doctors. This is a particular subset of people who have this genetic mutation tend to have high cholesterols at a very young age and are also at very high risk for developing heart disease. So the treatment is much more aggressive if you know you have this genetic condition. Just knowing you have high cholesterol is not enough. The other conditions, Lynch syndrome makes you prone to several kinds of cancer. Colon cancer is the big one, but any other kind of GI cancer happens much more frequently in individuals with Lynch syndrome. And then hereditary breast and ovarian cancer syndromes, people have sometimes heard of BRCA1 and BRCA2. These are genetic mutations that make people prone to breast and ovarian cancer, and you can take steps to detect these early and prevent them from causing morbidity and mortality. Again, they're all actionable, they all have high impact, and 90% of people are not aware. So that's why it's worth screening for these conditions. As a side advantage, because they're sequencing the whole genome, you find out other genetic things about yourself. So Helix is reporting these CDC Tier 1 conditions, but they're also reporting information about ethnicity that they can tell from your genes, and also things that you might be interested in, like are you more sensitive to caffeine, or do you are you more sensitive to cold? Do you like cilantro? That is genetic, yes. So these are just little fun facts. So the whole genome is being sequenced and saved away. And one of the, okay, so before that, here's the ethnic distribution this is in our patients so far. Yeah. So we have reasonably good diversity, but probably not as diverse as our population is. So we could do better. We could do better. This is our enrollment map. We're enrolling patients in our service area, so it's mostly Finger Lakes, Monroe County region, but also in the North Country where St. Lawrence is. They're also part of our health system. So you see the heat map there that shows where our patients are coming from. I think this is our transition slide.
Can you hear me okay? Thank you so much, Dr. Patak. So, the question is, why participate in this, or what interest do I have in this, right? So, I mean, the main piece is that we're doing this because we want to improve health for our community. We want to improve health for the population. So by participating in GenoWell, which is a completely voluntary program that we're bringing to the community, it gives you a better understanding of your health. So you can take proactive measures to help improve your health over time working with your provider. And it's no cost, which is amazing that we're able to offer this to the community. So by participating, it can give you a better understanding, again, of how your DNA impacts your own health and your wellness. It can also help support your relationship, like having a proactive relationship with your provider, or if you don't have a healthcare provider, it might also motivate you to get established with a provider to take charge of your health. It gives you the opportunity to build personalized wellness plans guided by your genetics,
and also may help support lifestyle changes and recommendations. And if you do have a positive result, you are offered a no-cost genetic counseling appointment with our genetic counselor, which is an amazing part of the program. We want people to understand what this information means for them. That's most important, to empower them to take proactive steps with their health. So if somebody tests positive, and as Dr. Patak mentioned, we're only expecting about 1 to 2% of the greater population to have a positive finding. You would have access to additional education and support resources, certainly more frequent monitoring, you may have additional testing recommendations, clinical recommendations that you can decide if you want to take and move forward with, and referrals to specialists that may be indicated for clinical care. Participating can also cause a ripple effect because it's not only just for a member of our community who's participating, but also for their family. We've had participants join the program because they may have been adopted, or they may want to know if they're a carrier for the purpose of their family members, if their parents may have one of these genes, if their children may have one of these genes. So it's also for their family that people participate, and for the greater community, and giving back to research and helping to build this research database. So participants, again, are participating in community research for population health. They'll help us to explore the relationship between our genetics and certain diseases. And it also may help close care gaps for underrepresented communities and lead to more personalized care for all. It also empowers a pathway to better care. So on the screen here you can see an example of a participant in the GenoWell program, invited to join GenoWell, participated, contributed their blood sample. His results showed an increased risk for Lynch syndrome, a condition that, as Dr. Patak mentioned, can lead to certain types of cancer, such as increased risk for colorectal cancer. After receiving his results, he received the complementary genetic counseling, was referred to a specialist, multiple specialists, built a proactive testing plan that also increased his risk for screenings from maybe what he would have had prior. Signing up is very simple. We try to make it a very streamlined process for anyone in the community who may be interested. It's all done through our Rochester Regional Health GenoWell website. There's an enrollment link at our website. It's also currently in our MyCare application for those of you who have MyCare and for the community. And it's an electronic informed consent process, which I know Dr. Bodroff talked about as well with informed consent, and that is a really important part of research participation. And that's really where you can learn about the study. You can ask questions before you decide to participate in research. And so there's a lot of information in the informed consent form. We always encourage questions if people have questions about it, but it's a very simple online informed consent form. It returns to the GenoWell team, the research team, and then we place a order for the blood test, the no-cost blood test, and we send a message to participants in MyCare. And then the participation includes a no-cost blood draw. So as Dr. Patak mentioned, a participant would walk into any Rochester Regional Health laboratory. There's no need for appointment, no need for fasting. You walk in, you tell them you're there for your GenoWell blood draw. They draw your blood. It's a small amount of blood. They get sent to our lab partner Helix, who does the DNA sequencing because they're the experts with that. And it returns to you in about 2 to 6 weeks. And it also includes the ancestry and health traits information that is also very, very interesting to see. Again, if you're sensitive to caffeine and sleep patterns and such. I wanted to mention too that an important part of what we're doing in our health system with this program is that there's a research component, but further on it also sets the foundation for innovation in our genetics and precision medicine, which is what Dr. Patak and I are part of in our team, to innovate in this space. And so by participating in this program, participants will have the ability to have their DNA re-queried for clinical purposes in the future. So I have a slide I'll go through. Actually, let me go through that because that will help explain what that means. So 33-year-old woman, here's an example, no known health problems, decides to sign up to participate in the program. Let's say at a state fair, for example, submits a sample. In 2 years, she's pregnant and wants carrier screening to understand her baby's risk for a certain condition. At that point, her provider can order a test on her without having a genetic test, without having the need for an additional specimen. So it improves access and it also can lower the cost of care for patients. So her provider is able to place that genetic test order for her with her consent without her having to provide an additional sample, and typically lower costs for the patient, which is amazing. 5 years later, she is diagnosed with dilated cardiomyopathy. Again, her provider may want to order some testing on her and can do that because she participated in this program. And then 3 years later, she experiences signs of depression and her physician wants to prescribe her medication. And there's the ability to order pharmacogenomics testing in the future as well. So in other words, how does your body metabolize a certain drug? So that will also be something that, because they can use the same DNA sample in the future, which is really, really innovative about this program. So rather than collecting a new sample and processing additional tests that cost thousands, up to thousands potentially each time, all that's needed is a requery of her initial sequence to receive a report back in record time and at a fraction of the cost. So our message is let your DNA lead the way, but we'd like to thank you for joining us today, and also thank those who have participated in GenoWell and the greater Helix Research Network program to help us advance medicine, and not only taking steps to protect your wellness, but also enabling GenoWell to help elevate the standard of personalized care for our community and for generations to come. With that, I thank you, and I think we'll
All right, well, I want to thank them for these great presentations, and I want to open up the floor for any questions. And the mic is not working, so you can pretend to hold the mic as it's a magic wand, and you may speak it, but I'm pointing to you so you get to ask the first question.
You say that each person must be what, 18, 19? 18, what's the upper limit? Okay,
No.
that's fine. Can you repeat the question and repeat the answer?
Okay, so moving forward, we will repeat the question and, all right, gentleman in the back.
All right, you talk about DNA sequencing. Who is going to be holding that information? Is it going to be a government project holding it, or is it going to be HIPAA?
So repeat the question.
The question is, who's going to be holding the DNA information? So DNA information is very tightly protected. So there are two places it's being stored. One is in conjunction with your medical record, because it's going to be used in the future for your own health. So it's like any other piece of your health information. It's protected by all the health records things, and it's associated with your name. The other place is a de-identified data bank that can be used for research. And that one doesn't have any identifying information on it, but it'll be used for large research projects and associations with clinical things.
My last follow-up question. I know sometimes when you do DNA sequencing, it sometimes goes with your health insurances. How's that going to have an impact with your insurance?
Great questions.
So the question was, how does that impact your ability to get health insurance? There are actually laws that protect you against using genetic information to affect your health insurability and your employability. So those things are well protected. What is not as well protected by the law is life insurance and disability insurance. And life insurance companies today go looking in your medical record to get health information, and this would be similar to any other health information that's in your record.
Okay.
And now it does. The magic mic works. Okay. So my question is more about the clinical trial from our first presenter. I wonder, I know you mentioned the IRB. It's sort of some kind of governing body. I'm not exactly sure. But so like during the clinical trial, are they audited in some kind of way? How does someone make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do and telling participants what they're supposed to tell them? You know what I mean? I'm like, is somebody watching?
Great question.
I love that question. So the question was, yes, there's an institutional review board, or IRB, and so they watched us opening a trial, and her question was, is anybody watching this as this goes to see if anything's awry? Is that correct? Okay. So, excellent question. Yes, they watch us all the time. So there's a couple different audits. So if we have a clinical trial that's being done at different sites, the sponsor, who is also being watched by sometimes an IRB elsewhere, we call it a central IRB, they come and they audit us and make sure that we're following everything to make sure they're still okay with our site and the trial. And then our own institutional review board does have periodic audits of all our trials, at least yearly.
Can I go?
Yes, please go.
This is kind of a follow-up to what was just asked. With the IRB, the question, the second point was diversified and culturally different backgrounds and gender representation, scientific and non-scientific members. The question is, with all of today's conversation or today's act is you're telling a room full of people of color, Black people, we don't want you excluded from these studies and from these trials. When we think about what is currently happening with sponge erasing all DEI efforts, any institution who's doing anything to make sure that populations that have traditionally been disregarded or not counted in numbers or given I don't want to say special treatment, or special consideration, but what I want to say is traditionally have been neglected from opportunities. And so this current administration has erased much of that. How would I, as a Black woman, feel that I can trust and move forward with the IVR process, our IRB process, knowing that you still want me there, they're not gonna sponge the information or tell you, no, you can't do it that way. You know, you can't consider it just like one. That's my first question, and I have a second question for something else.
I'm going to attempt to summarize it, but I think I can. So basically what she's saying is you have this IRB process, everybody's supposed to be all-inclusive on this, but we have seen with the current administration changes in DEI, and it seems to be going in a different direction, like erasing and marginalizing people. Is that correct? And how do we know, yes, how do we know that things are still going to be okay going forward? So the IRB is not influenced or gets that funding from anything federal or government related. We do abide by FDA codes for conduct, but the IRB setup is not regulated by that. I am going to tell you, I do share some of that concern. I have had colleagues from different institutions that have had funding change or disappear completely for trials that aren't pushing a medication, pushing a treatment, but instead studying populations. And so yes, it's real. And so there's ways that people have gotten around funding to try to include populations. And it comes from the community too. The community continuing to say, we need representation and these trials are important. Because there is still funding that exists, but everybody's kind of fighting for it right now, so we have to fight for the things that are really important to study. I hope that answers it.
I think so. Thank you so much. Because that leads to my second question, which is, we live in a capitalist society, especially the big pharma. Who is funding this Gina Well, and who funds Helix?
Where's the money?
Always
So Helix is a for-profit company. They're doing this to make money, no question about it, but they're also a very ethical company. I've dealt with them now for a couple of years and I've seen how they function. Who is funding this? It's actually the health system. So the health system is paying to get these tests done for a number of different reasons. Number one, we think this is better for the health of our community, and that's one of our missions, is to improve the health of the community. Sooner or later, we're gonna start getting paid based on how healthy we keep our community. And so this will play in when those changes come into place. There are some, sort of side benefits. So if someone doesn't have a doctor and participates in this, it's more likely they'll come to us after they've participated in something like this. So we expect to see some more patients. Some of the people who get identified with one of these conditions might need treatments on an ongoing basis, and that will be healthcare that's required that'll come back to our system. So there's some revenue that'll come back from that. So a number of different reasons the health system is footing the bill. But we believe it's a community health program. We're not restricting this to our patients. It's available to anybody who lives here.
Just to piggyback a little bit on the first question, the internal review board, I know you said they're supposed to be diverse and culturally different and scientists and not scientists, but who's actually on these boards and how do they pick the people? I've never heard of this. And where do they get the people from? Is it regular people out of the community? Where do they get the people from? And is it really reflective of what you said it's supposed to be?
So I can say, I'm not personally on the review board. I'm probably joining it after the summer, so that there's oncology representation on the board. It's led by, currently ours happens to be led by a doctor who has done a lot of years in research and working in universities, and she has ties in the community. But there's a standard process for the IRB where they have already set their own rules. We have to have so many people to balance it, otherwise the meeting doesn't commence on it.
And so I can also add to that. So I've done research, and I've had to go in front of different committees with the IRB, and the individuals that have asked me about the research, they were not medical. So they were from the community to say, you want to do research on children, what exactly is the outcomes you're looking for?
I'm just thinking, like, in terms of how jury selection happens, how it's supposed to be a jury of your peers. And we all know that there's never a jury of your peers when it comes to the Black community, because it's supposed to be scouring the voting rolls and it's supposed to be doing this and that and getting peers, and it just doesn't happen like that. So that's what I'm just thinking about. I know what it's supposed to be, but is that really happening? Because I really getting into the community and getting regular people, and, I don't know, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, I wish I could answer it with more specifics, but I haven't actually been part of it to be the selection. I can tell you how they reached out to me and they said, we're missing somebody to represent from an oncology standpoint. Would you consider joining it? So I think that's how they're looking for people. But I couldn't tell you more specific than that.
Yeah. So there are federal regulations that IRBs need to have a certain composition. So they need to represent the researchers that they're regulating to some degree. So there are members from each of the research groups on there, but there are also community members, people who are not clinical or medical at all. Those are required roles. We have to have those in there.
Because if they don't get the right people on the board, then they're not going to be able to ensure that the right things are taken.
Of course.
Another question over here.
No, I was going to respond to the IRB.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you for the information. If I were to participate in GeneWell and then I migrate out of the MyCare region or out of the hospital regions where they are participating, how can my information still be leveraged by my new PCP or my new care team?
Yeah. So the question is, what happens to my information if I move out of the area or not connected with any of these 17 healthcare systems? Well, the information is still there. It can be accessed through Helix, and your provider in any part of the country can log on to the Helix website and get relevant genetic information. It is a little more cumbersome though, because here we're going to integrate that with your medical record, and we're going to make it easy through the electronic record to just order a future test. You wouldn't be able to do it that easily if you were outside the system. But the information's there, can be accessed.
can you talk about the kind of research that you're doing and how it benefits the community? Was that
Is that a genetic question?
that was a genetic question, because you're collecting all this information, and you said you were going to do research. What kind of research?
Okay, so not all of it will be done by us. Some of it will be done as an aggregate across the 17, so all this information is going to a central source. And if you have 2.5 million DNA sequences with associated clinical information, you can make all kinds of connections that, this gene must be associated with X, Y, and Z. So I'll give you an example. People are interested in these GLP-1 drugs that make you lose weight, but not everybody responds to them. And we think there are genetic factors that might determine that. So if you've got a large database like this, you can start looking at, well, what are those genetic factors in the responders and in the non-responders? And then can you predict, based on your genetic profile, whether you should be on one of these drugs or not? So that's an example.
There are two more questions. The second question is around security related to the data and ensuring that the data is not hackable.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in partnering with Helix, they have a very strict security measures that they put in place. Everything is encrypted. They do continuous data monitoring. Anyone participating in the program on the research staff has to undergo human subjects protection training to ensure that they understand safety, confidentiality, privacy. Data is also covered by HIPAA because it's healthcare information. So there's, of course, we talked about the institutional review board, the IRB, and there's a lot of protections with that as well. So it's very secure with it's with your medical record, of course, which is protected by HIPAA, and then also by Helix is encrypted. And again, they have lots of security measures into this.
And the last question, I'm just trying to understand what I understood from GenoWell, that the system is paying for this. So let me just check my understanding. The system gets money from consumers. Like if I have my health care, that pays for the system. And there may be other like federal dollars. So help me understand what are the sources of the system's money that's ultimately paying for it? Because to me, it's like if I have my health care, I pay my premium, I use Rochester Regional Health. In some ways, I am paying into the system that is supporting GenoWell.
So where exactly does that money come from for the system? I think that's a complicated question. I mean, the system is huge, right? It's a $4 billion system that gets money from grants, money from loans, money from delivering healthcare, and they have to use that. They're a not-for-profit corporation, so at the end of the day, they have to use that to provide care to the community in as cost-effective a way as they can. So I think you can view this as this is part of that infrastructure. We're paying toward the care of the community from our budget for so we pay for other things, right? We set up clinics in places, that's an expense. Don't always get back the entire thing in revenues, but if it's a community need, we do it. So we look at the big picture, decide what our mission is, and what fits, like this gets done.
I want to first thank you for the information and for sharing in the ways that you did today. As a community that has historically been marginalized and intentionally blocked from receiving certain information, as you shared in the beginning, Mistrust has really become a part of our experience with the healthcare system. And in a lot of the questions I'm hearing today, I think that we are looking for some additional information to help us trust the process that you all are familiar with. And so as a researcher myself, I am familiar with IRB, but that is not common language that the everyday person has. And so I think it would be helpful in this space if you could share a little bit about some of the things that IRB requires for you to submit in your protocol to help the room understand the kinds of protections that IRB puts in place so that your research is ethical, because that's the point of the IRB.
I think Heather has done so much of that over her career.
That's a fantastic question. I would love to take that one because I've also, prior to coming into our precision medicine group, have worked in research for many years, more on the administrative side and not clinical. And so I can talk a lot about what we had to submit to the IRB because there's a lot. It feels like it's never ending, but I know it's for very good cause. There's a lot that goes in, a tremendous amount, you probably know, a lot that goes into opening any type of research study. The ones that Dr. Podrick mentioned, the GenoWell program, it can take months, sometimes it can take a year or more to develop a study and open it. So there's a lot of rules and regulations. I always like to tell people, it's like, you know how healthcare is very regulated? It's like exponentially regulated for research and for good reason. So when we open a study, for example, there's a research protocol. There has to be some type of document that outlines what your mission is, what your objective is, what are you looking to achieve with this research. So there has to be a purpose for conducting this research. And they want to know what it is. And there's got to be methodology. How are you doing this research? What's your sample size? Who's in your sample? Like how many people? What are your statistical plans for analyzing this data? And then what are the hypotheses you have? So there's got to be a protocol, some type of purpose, reasoning for conducting your research. In addition, IRBs have applications. There's always some type of application you have to submit. There's often a consent form, depending on the type of research. Most research requires an informed consent form that outlines. There's even a lot of specific regulations about what has to be in the consent form, how it could benefit patients, what are the risks, what are the alternatives, how long do you have to participate for. Research, you can withdraw anytime if you need to, if you want to withdraw it. They're voluntary, So there's a lot in the informed consent process. In addition, they want to know that staff is, I'll try to keep this short because I could talk about it for a long time, but they want to know that staff is qualified who's performing the research. So you have to have a principal investigator, and both Dr. Plata and Dr. Bobbitt have been principal investigators overseeing the research studies for many years. And so they take a lot of responsibility and main oversight for the research. So they'll want to see credentials, if you participated in research before, and show your qualifications. Trying to think what else. Aside from the protocol, sometimes when you're in a research study too, there may be an amendment to that protocol that comes out, something changed, or there's a new risk that we learned about when conducting the research. And so there's a process for making sure that patients are informed of that, and that you have to submit that change to your IRB and get that approved, and then inform your participants. So there's continuous monitoring of studies. There's a lot of documentation, training records. Human subject protection training is one that all staff have to undergo to participate in research. So I'm sure there's a lot more than that, but that's a little bit of. I want to add something.
I can give a quick example. So I think our IRB takes their job very seriously. And so recently I submitted something that was a questionnaire that was going to go out to a bunch of people. So simple study, low risk. So an IRB should look at this and say, what harm can a questionnaire do? All he's doing is asking a bunch of people some questions, right? But we said it was going to be an anonymous questionnaire. But it had questions in it that said, what do you do? And the questions were so specific that you were losing your anonymity with it. And it was not something that we were really paying that much attention to, but the IRB came back with, hey, you're saying this is anonymous, but look at all these questions. You're going to know who these people are based on what they do. And so it was a good catch. And we said, okay, so we're going to ask much more general. So that's the kind of way they're protected. They're really good.
I actually just have a few comments, and I was asked to share something from one of our sorority sisters who's not here. She used to be a pharmaceutical sales rep. She just wanted to share that clinical trials are extremely important, especially for misrepresented or underrepresented populations. She actually has benefited from several clinical trials because as a pharmaceutical rep, oftentimes she would go into practices and speak with doctors, and with here, there's not enough of us to be able to prescribe whatever works, right? So it's always trial and error. And then also, when the whole opioid crisis broke open, she would end up in arguments about what was happening from that perspective. So she just wanted me to share that it was extremely important for her. She actually participated in 3 medical trials related to eye drops, and there's one that's on the market now, preservative-free as a result of her participation. So I just wanted to share that it does benefit us. But the other thing is, I think everybody's kind of touched on it, and I just want to say it again, the whole purpose of this program was to have us go from mistrust to meaning, and I think you guys are doing a really good job of helping us to understand. I think we're still going to need more, because we, as a culture, and I'll speak for myself, I have been under the pretense that this medical system was not designed by us, nor for us, as evidenced by everything from the Tuskegee Institute experiment, Henrietta Lacks, where you're taking someone's unauthorized DNA or cells and profiting from it, to J. Marion Sims, who experimented on enslaved Black women to further science. So we are very skeptical as a community. Either we're really skeptical or we believe everything that you say and we do it. And so we need to come somewhere in between and in the middle, and I think this is really a good first step for us to go, and we would love to continue these conversations. And so with that said, I actually am also, I completed a clinical trial because I believe I have to put my money where my mouth is if I want people that look like me to be able to get better, because one prescription does not fit all, and we are different, as evidenced by people that have sickle cell, for example. You can't give me a medication that another or race doesn't even experience. So I just feel like this is really, really good. I'm really glad that Delta is leading the way in getting this information out to the community, and we hope to continue to partner with you.
Absolutely. We tend to be the first on many things, and let this be the first of many conversations in our community. We have one more question. Was there a question over here? No. Oh, sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. All right, so I want to agree and say, hey, we need to be a part of clinical trials. Again, I am a 10-year breast cancer survivor. And it was brutal, very, very brutal. And my question is, what is the strategy? Because we want people to be a part of clinical trials, but we can't even get people screened in time. So what is the strategy to make sure that the whole process, can we go through that so we can be a part of clinical trials?
Trying to break the answer down because it's such a loaded answer. It's a tireless process. And I can only imagine what a tireless process you've been in for your own survival. And I thank you for sharing that personal experience so other people can hear. I'm sure there was a day and time that you felt overwhelmed or lost, or what's the next step. And I think forums like this, I really thank you for letting us talk, is really one of the first steps, is the education, and the second part are the tough questions. So that you can be your own advocate. And I can't imagine how many times you felt like I have to advocate for myself.
My whole community, absolutely.
Yeah, and so you're saying since 2016, and there are medications now that weren't even available then. It was such a different outlook. And I think we don't want anybody to feel that lost for that long. We want more people, 10 years and more, surviving. So it's caring for each other as humans, everybody, your community, Delta, but everybody. getting people screened at the right time, knowing thyself, being your own best advocate. And then, you know, from our part as providers, it's bringing up these difficult things. I had a woman in the clinic earlier this week who had a different type of cancer that is usually cured with surgery and radiation. They don't usually end up in my office. And I said, you know, I do have a treatment for what you have. It's not great. What about a clinical trial? And I had to sit down and do some education, because the first thing she said, which isn't surprising, I get this a lot, she goes, you want me to be a guinea pig?
Yes.
And so, whoa. This is just to talk about it. I don't have a clinical trial, but we should take a look. And one of the first places I look is at clinicaltrials.gov, or some larger institutions that have other experts who only treat, say, that type of cancer, or have clinical trials available that they're running themselves. So the first step is really that education, and then welcoming her is we're welcoming you to ask those really tough questions to us.
Okay, I hope. Let's see it. I just want to say, first of all, thank you all. I think some others have said that, just for bringing this information up and how you presented it. Your demeanor is amazing. We have legitimate concerns, legitimate questions. The best way you can continue to advocate, especially for, I'm just gonna say Black people, because you're presenting to, again, a room full of Black persons, to auto-correct your colleagues who may not know how to handle the questions, the comments, the distrust, the mistrust. You can best help us to, if you're in a room and none of us are there to kind of stand up, you're at that table to speak up ourselves, please speak up for us and make sure that, one, they don't further misguide our narrative as if we are guinea pigs, because if that's how we continue to be perceived, we intuitively would know that. So we will need you, since you're at the table. I know Dr. Wilson's at the table too, but some rooms you may be in that she's not in, to speak up for us and keep that same level of demeanor, answer the questions, be kind, be courteous, and quite frankly, just be loving as if we were your own family. Thank you.
I feel like the trust is being made here
today.
Okay, not to shift back to our federal government, but you did talk about funding not coming directly from the feds. But how do you maintain your scientific integrity, considering that you still have to adhere to FDA guidelines? And we know who is leading the FDA.
Yes. The FDA does have some requirements, but I think one of the better parts of the current structure is that it does get down to the community level. Such as, there's been a lot of questions today about the institutional review board, which I really appreciate. I didn't know there'd be so many. But really, that is more on the community level to make sure some of these protections, that it's not just federal, so that you can account for some of those shifts as well. And I think there was a second part to your question too.
No, I was just saying that we've seen how the FDA is also stripping or amending some of the things that have protected us. So I'm like, even in the midst of that, and you're trying to ensure that we are still protected, I just wanted to see if that integrity was still maintained on your end, considering that they still do have a lever of control.
They do. And as I mentioned, one of the more concerning levers, I think, is the funding. And there's been some questions about funding. So when we're talking about protection and funding, I just want to say a little bit about clinical trial funding. Clinical trials can be funded by big pharma, sometimes, and moving things. And sometimes it does just lead to a very good drug discovery, okay? But then there are also groups of physicians and advocates that come together for things called cooperative groups that also apply for the limited funding or have grants or other donations that go to research, and they come together and they say, what are the things that Big Pharma is not interested in studying? Things like advocating for different groups, things like comparing medications together to seeing which one is better, where the pharmaceutical companies don't want us to do that. And then that in and of itself, having those groups and having those advocacy groups as part of these clinical trials, part of that has been protective as well. And then that in addition to it being also on a community level, I see that as some of the protections.
Thank you, thank you. I want to give a round of applause to our